Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for logging in today for our presentation. Before we start, I want to thank our sponsors, the 440 Art Gallery, the Garner Glazer Foundation, the Park Slope Civic Council, Poets and Writers, the Fife Diggy Dog Foundation, our individual donors, and you, our audience, for making this programming possible. Today, we are really blessed and so grateful to have Frank X. Walker, so a poet that I've known for quite a few years and have always admired his work. Frank is the former Kentucky Poet Laureate. He is a professor in the Department of English and the African American and Africana Studies program at the University of Kentucky, and the founding editor of Pluck, the Journal of Afro-Latin Arts and Culture. Frank is a Cave Canem Fellow and co-founder of the Afro-Latin Poets. He is the author of 8 collections of poetry, including Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers, which was the winner of the 2014 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, and Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York, winner of the Lillian Smith Book Award, as well as 2 new collections, the Afro-Latin Sonnets and About Flight. Frank has lectured all over the world, and he is dedicated to deconstructing and forcing a new definition of what it means to be an Appalachian. The Lannan Poetry Fellowship Award recipient, has degrees from the University of Kentucky and Spalding University, as well as 3 honorary doctorates from the University of Kentucky, Spalding University, and the Transylvania University. We are so honored to have Frank read for us today, and I'd like to introduce to you now, Frank X. Walker.
Hey, EJ. Hey, guys.
Hey.
I appreciate you guys taking some time out for poetry. I want to assume it's gloomy everywhere, but it's pretty gray here in Kentucky. Now that the snow and the rain has come through. But I'm going to read today from a collection called Masterman Black, Pandemic and Protest Poems, because I feel like it's probably the most appropriate thing right now. You know, I was going back and forth. I almost read from the Turn Me Loose Medgar book. Then I thought about how close we were to the King holiday. And then when I really thought about it and acknowledged the fact that I'm just hopefully getting over COVID, I don't mean metaphorically, I mean, I was actually diagnosed with COVID or received a positive test last week. So I'm supposedly out of isolation, but I'm still feeling a little beat up on. So that's where my head is and my heart is right now. So I want to read some of those poems because it feels like we've been in this COVID period for more than the 2 years it's been. It feels like 5. So it's COVID time still. And I'll try to power through these poems with as much energy as I have and save time for questions at the end. And I hope that's enough. I want to say that for me initially, when COVID first happened to everybody, I really wasn't that shaken when I didn't focus on the news. The idea of being kind of shut in. Here it was called a stay-at-home order. Was kind of a gift to me. I like my home. I like being in it. And we were leading such busy lives that any excuse to slow down was kind of a bonus to us. We had a brand new house we had moved into 3 years ago and had barely walked around in the yard. So during those stay-at-home orders, we had a chance to set up bird feeders, to start gardening again, to put our little one out in the grass and watch him enjoy the grass. and really get to know this space that we call home. We got to make it a home. And so I want to start with a poem that starts in that positive energy space that came out of the kind of rare gift of a pandemic. This is called Baptism by Dirt, for my wife, Shauna. All believers know about the power of water, though not enough about the power of dirt. My mama used to walk barefoot in our vegetable garden, get down on her hands and knees and almost pray in the dirt. My wife and I and our 3-year-old built and planted 3 raised bed gardens. Watching her dip her fingers into the dirt to coddle what will feed us reminds me of mama. And then, what is it that women know about nurturing a seed into a piece of fruit, about believing in the power of dirt and suns and water? I return from our labor with sore knees and back, fingernails and hands caked with dirt. She floats back into the house, cleaner, somehow less burdened, as if she spent the weekend burying all of her heavy things, as if she whispered to something sacred, and it whispered something back. So that was the rare warmth of all that was happening for us starting back 2 years ago. Then every time we turned on the news, there was nothing but bad news all around, for every age and everybody. And then odd things started to happen during the same time period. And then the protest kicked in. So I'm gonna go back and forth and read some poems that kind of land in the protest area and the others that deal directly with the pandemic. This next poem is called Mrs. Butterworth, Uncle Ben, and Aunt Jemima. And it comes out of, watching the news and hearing that these large food companies finally were ready to acknowledge that they had been using racist images on their packaging for their foods. And this happened in the middle of this kind of massive awareness and awakening in America. So I wanted to share this poem. Mrs. Butterworth, Uncle Ben, and Aunt Jemima walk into a bar in America. Butterworth says, "I'm being repackaged." Ben says, "I'm being rebranded." Jemima says, "I remember when they branded my mama on her back." The bartender says, "I could stand in the middle of Main Street and kill somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters." Butterworth says, "Then I'll take 8 bullets in my sleep." Ben says, "Choke me to death with your knee." Jemima says, "Lock me in a holding cell and say I decided to hang myself." The bartender poured the drinks, said he felt threatened and was simply standing his ground when he thought the thug was reaching for a gun. The headline said, "Well-loved American foods resisted arrest, failed to comply, and were delicious while Black." Butterworth's daughter said, "Here's the progress. We might finally get an anti-lynching bill." Ben's son said, "I'd rather they abolish qualified immunity." Jemima's kid said, "They abolished slavery once. Then they hung my mama on that box." So I talked about, how quickly the warmth leaves when you think about this period we're still in. This next poem is a persona poem in the voice of Officer Chauvin's knee. It's called Complicit at Most. This came out of the George Floyd related news. Complicit at most. I am no more guilty than the officer's eyes choosing to look the other way. Technically, I was not even touching his neck. All I could feel was the hot cotton insides of Officer Chauvin's slacks against my skin. Almost 9 minutes is a long time to kneel on a neck especially if you are unaccustomed to praying or begging. But after pressing all of me down, he put this all on me as if he was planning to propose, but got cold feet and was just too embarrassed to get up and just walk away from this altercation, marrying us both to this moment till death do us part. You see why the sweet part was at the beginning of, there wasn't a lot to dance about, during the pandemic on set or the protests and this impact around the country. One of the things that we took some time doing was appreciating allies and what was happening around the country, and just talk about how much distance it was between them and us, so that it felt more like an us than a them. This next poem is called Ode to Meatpackers. And for me, my father had worked in the meatpacking plant when I was a wee lad. So it spoke volumes to me when I read the headline about how many meatpacking plants were hit hard with these COVID-19 outbreaks because they hadn't taken special precautions to keep the workers safe. And it wasn't until these national articles that embarrassed those companies did they do anything. And of course, with federal help, they were able to get new personal protection equipment and even change the spacing, but they never shut down food processing because we must have meat on our table in America. So this is called Ode to Meatpackers. Oh, you of tired feet, sore hands, weary second shift eyes, and darker minimum wage skin. The executive order signed by the president to keep your plants open, to keep meat in grocery stores and on America's tables, despite the need for more spacing on your lines, personal protection equipment, more sanitizing stations, and barriers to separate workers, at least implies you are now essential. Forget the ICE raids, families at the border, and the children still in cages, ignoring the prioritizing of beef over ventilators, pork over vaccines, and poultry over tests. Now that it's considered patriotic for somebody to die for the economy, take heart. In case you missed out on a signed stimulus check, his autograph is on the order. And it makes it clear that he takes responsibility this time and almost acknowledges your sacrifice and your place in the supply chain to satisfy America's appetite. One of the things that was interesting for me, I'm from a very small town and most of my siblings still live in that same town, and I'm one of 11, so that's a lot of siblings. And because it's so small and provincial and also very conservative, in the beginning, they didn't take COVID that seriously. It was really hard to go home and visit and be the only one with a mask on, or the only family with a mask on, and be the subject of ridicule. So that in 2020, I missed my first Easter dinner since I've been alive because I had a year-old, and I didn't want to put any of us at risk. So this is the closest to humor that I think this book approaches, and it's called Easter Prayer 2020 AC. After COVID, we're not really there yet, but AC. Easter Prayer. Oh, powerful Black Jesus, please protect my brothers and sisters and their families and friends when they gather together illegally to enjoy Easter dinner and the Sabbath. May they pass around the sanitizer after holding hands in prayer. May whoever is lifting up your name be wearing a mask correctly, O Lord. May any pork that touches their lips not mess with their blood pressure. Hide the salt, sweet Jesus, and please grant them the vision to bring at least one sugar-free dessert, some diet sodas, and unsweetened tea. Strengthen them for their fight against that devil diabetes and all cancers, Lord. Thank you for their on-time unemployment checks, Medicaid, and Obamacare. Help them choose wisely if the choice is between the cable and light bill and their life insurance. And if it is your will to take all their asses because they refuse to believe COVID is real, let this be the best meal they ever ate, Lord. And take them all on the same day so that they may offer comfort to each other in the hospital and allow us to endure only one drive-through service. Amen. Some of them thought that was funny. I mentioned my my little one. One of the things that when you talk about humor, sometimes the comment really is about sarcasm as much as it is about trying to get somebody to laugh. This poem is actually called I'm Being Sarcastic. And I don't have to remind you guys, at least for the next couple of poems, who was president when these poems were coming into being in 2020. I'm being sarcastic. Our 2-year-old grabbed the mic, pronounced his uneaten slice of watermelon a boat, and sailed it off his plate onto the dark blue sea table mat, becoming the after-dinner entertainment instead of the evening press conference. And as soon as we were all convinced he was right, he picked it up, smiled slyly, took 2 quick bites and pronounced it a race car. I thought, my God, he could be president. And I imagined him in a big red tie instead of his signature bib, the second ever toddler to take a dump in the Oval Office. We all thought telling little white lies and dressing up like a clown was cute until the German kid opened up a real science kit. Our problem child makes unflyable paper planes out of the Constitution, uses fat crayons to color his talking points, pretends to know more than all the experts, and waits for the adults in the room to clean up his latest mess. This next poem is also in a similar vein, but it's more in tribute to one of the things I miss most because of the pandemic, and that was summer musical concerts. You know, it was my one chance to see, you know, major bands that toured the country and came together in large groups at these major events, as opposed to just being available every weekend to us in Kentucky. So I miss it a lot. And, you know, I'm a child of hip hop. So those hip hop concerts included DJs who were these amazing artists themselves and did a lot of mixing and scratching on turntables and had their own following. This next one is called DJ Battle, and it references those musical, all-stars, but they also kind of poke a little fun at the president with the same initials. This is called DJ Battle, and has an epigraph that says, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. President DJ Trump. The oppressor's private property is always more important to the privileged. Their power is what police protect. Backed by a National Guard, fronting a commander-in-chief, known to incite and encourage violence against POC by the FOP and other good people versus thugs. If you don't understand this behavior or these people, you don't understand emotional or psychological trauma, you don't understand generational grief, and you really don't understand injustice or American history. No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace, no just ICE raids, no guilty cops, just us dead, dying, and chalk marked over and over again. Like some whack DJ rewinding the bridge or dead refrain, scratching at our eyes with already viral, breathless black body porn, professionally made by the hands, feet, and now knees of thug policed again. Instead of turning the tables, we drag out turntables and spin and spin and spin, searching old wax, seeking to sample something human, anything truly good to mix with this Black in our lives until we matter. DJ Battle. This is the part where I talk about how strange it is to read to a computer screen and try to believe there are actually people back there somewhere listening. But I know you're out there. I'm gonna read the title poem for this collection. It's called Masterman Black. And it was inspired after my first visit to the grocery store in the daytime, wearing a Black mask, and how people responded to me. And their physical responses said that they didn't think I was protecting them and myself from in the pandemic, that maybe I was a potential robber or up to no good. But it's also honors Paul Laurence Dunbar, whose poem is referenced in this collection, and this poem in particular, We Wear the Mask. Maskman Black, after Paul Laurence Dunbar. Black male me walks into a store in broad daylight, Black phone in hand, wearing a Black mask. You already know how this ends. Somebody felt threatened, somebody got shot. Black woman wailing makes news, but it isn't new. All the chalk outlines are white, all the states are red. The coronavirus doesn't discriminate, racists still do. Peel off mask, no grins, no lies. Hopefully you can appreciate that if you're unfamiliar with the poem as well. Here's another one pulled straight from the news. The headline says, and the title says, "To the man spewing spit and vitriol in the trooper's face at the Capitol." This happened in Michigan, in the State House. If you don't know the image, imagine an angry activist spitting in the face of a state trooper who's guarding the governor, who's a woman. Expressing so much passion towards a woman who is not even there. A kiss away from a man who pretends that you're not there either. Has to be a whole chapter in the S&M Guide to the Universe, a sex manual for broken men. Maybe the ever-present Confederate flags are constant reminders of a time when a noose and the rope that birthed it was not intended for the woman you pay to bind you at night, but for bad hombres and N-words you fear she dreams about. Maybe you handcuff her because the police academy rejected you too. And when you role play, she is Emmett Till or Trayvon or another 14-year-old boy. But that would make you a pedophile, and you ain't sick, just angry at a woman who you believe locked you up too tight, stripped you of your liberties, made you feel like 3/5 of a man, except for the massive gun you are carrying, which is not about overcompensation per se, but about expressing the freedoms you claim you no longer have because a woman in the State House gave you no choice, took something precious and sacred from you without your consent or before you could agree on a safe word. You guys all right out there? I'm gonna assume y'all can hear your response. I'm gonna read a poem. One of the things when I thought about what was happening, when I tried to embrace this idea of a pandemic, I'm of an era where, because of Easter, the Easter season, one of the things my family always did was watch the 10 Commandments. Before it was colorized. I think it's colorized now. And I think It was found out that Yul Brynner was Russian. And in the news, there was all this conversation about the president's relationship with Russia and fondness for Putin. They maybe want to, take a closer look at the potential to write something that spoke to this. So this is called Exodus, with an epigraph from Bob Marley that says, "We, the generation, trod through great tribulation." Exodus with a question mark. Exodus? This could be our Babylon, our Egypt. We're living in a remake of a classic with a reality TV star in the role of Pharaoh, and plagues of incompetence, ignorance, divisiveness, arrogance, and greed traumatizing the people and the land. This Neo-Ramses wearing too much stage makeup, prone to abandon the script and create his own lines and truths, has made a shambles of the Constitution and the commandments. No more separation of church and state, no more checks and balances. His God is money. He and his cronies stole an election. He idolizes Putin, golfs on Sunday, sleeps with porn stars, covets his own daughter, and bears false witness in full-page ads in the New York Times. He lies about a pandemic that is killing thousands every day. He is not a stable genius, but probably smart enough to know that Yul Brynner was Russian too. If Hollywood could pretend that Egypt wasn't in Africa, if Charlton Heston could play the Hebrew Moses, then liars can lead and Slovenian models can play Nefertiti. But if the Surgeon General is the court jester and science and truth have been exiled, where do we, who have known hardship and strife, find our Moses? All right, we check the time. All right, making good time here. About three or four more, and I'll release you from this hostage situation. All right, this is this is called "Oh Death." I mean, you can't talk about the pandemic and not talk about death. It continues to be one of the saddest things about this, beyond the ignorance connected to it. Oh, death. After a tear-stained winter with 3 family funerals, you stretched your neck and took a basketball icon and his daughter, a Black man jogging, another, and then the gifted lyricist who brought us grandma's hands. You took a young queen in her sleep before the public lynching of a gentle giant. You have been more stubborn this year than the weeds we twist out of the ground and from between bricks, returning for more and more before we can even say their names. While our cucumbers shriveled on the vine, you took Jackie Robinson, Thurgood Marshall, and James Brown, King T'Challa, all over again at the same time when you came for the medium with a kind of blight he battled privately. It's not even flu season yet, like our sunflower raised from seed, threatening to reach her namesake. Your hunger seems to know no bounds. Studying the former, tiny plants turn bushes, wild green things growing and stretching out in every conceivable direction. I watch every bright yellow bloom slow into an almost bursting fruit, full of summer showers and sunlight. Every one we pluck from the vine is replaced with another and another and another. Watching the large, now yellow leaves fall away from the heads of cabbages, knitting themselves into almost spinning globes, into 2 rows of blue-green planets. I ask the air around me, what is the lesson here? What nugget of wisdom am I missing? Granted, all of this started as a box of dirt. We made holes and filled them with hope. They reached for the stars and followed the sun every day, rested at night. Most of them fed us. A few shone bright like comets before crashing into the dirt to become one with the earth again. Oh, death, life can't be this painful, beautiful, and simple. Can it? That's back to the gardening. I think I had enough energy for one more. This poem called Corona Love. And it starts and ends in the same place. These selected poems do. Trying to harvest something, trying to look for a silver lining in the beauty and benefit of actually being home, however forced. This is called Corona Love for Shauna. Our stay-at-home order has come with a silver lining. Suddenly, we can take our time with things that matter, with everything we may have taken for granted. Saturday, for example, my wife and I made love all day. Now, I don't mean we locked ourselves in our bedroom for hours and hours, stayed naked, and I mean, all the kids slept in, so we didn't rush either. We took our time. We kissed. I mean, really kissed. No pecks, no smooches. We kissed deep and long, and we meant it. I have to admit that the way the machine ran around here pre-corona, we were lucky to get a peck in before getting 4 of us off in 4 different directions to 4 different places, all before 8 a.m. A measly peck on those mornings had to last all day. So we didn't just kiss, we lingered in each other's arms, a place we found ourselves still clinging to after digesting the previous day's body count and the news, trying to verbalize our worst fears as the headlines got closer and closer to our front door. We savor everything now. We know that if one of us gets sick, there will be nothing but difficult choices to follow. If any of our kids were stricken, we were told we couldn't be at their bedside, what then? We hugged and flirted through breakfast. We held hands, sent private messages, planned a naked nap to coincide with our 2-year-old sleep time. The few we know who are dying will soon become many. We know there will be more funerals we can't attend. The impending loss is so heavy, it's hard to keep convincing the teenagers that the homework, which used to feel like life and death, is just that serious right now. So we smile and wink and touch and hug and kiss and squeeze and cry and laugh every chance we get. We don't know what's coming and who's going or if we will be among them. So take our advice. If you wake up already where you want to be and don't have to rush anywhere, recognize it as a gift. Take your time, linger, wallow, forget finishing. Don't stop, leave a tender bookmark and come back as soon as you can. Thank you for listening. I hope you were. I'm gonna disappear for 1 second to grab some more tea. I'm back.
Well, thank you, Frank. We really, really enjoyed that. And I do believe everybody was listening. So at this point, we're going to have a question and answer segment. And I open the floor to questions from the audience. If you have any, I will start us off. And don't be shy, jump right in if you have a question or want to make a comment about any part of the conversation that we would be having. So Frank, I wanted to know, at the beginning of the pandemic, did you actively try not to write about it?
I did the exact opposite, actually. For me, this whole book thing started because it was April, National Poetry Month. And a group of my friends and I always try to commit to writing a poem a day during that month. But I decided, because I was also very distracted by what's happening in the news, that I was going to see if I could actually make everything I was going to write thematically linked to what was happening in the news, which was at the time April 1, dominated by pandemic numbers and data and newness and death, and this plague seemed to permeate information. No matter how important it was, everything had COVID connected to it. You couldn't extract it from anything else. So I didn't try to. So I just tried to consume the news of the day. And then when I got the next morning to write, which is always before everybody else, try to write about it, because I knew I would dream about it. And some of those dreams would be horrific. And I knew I couldn't move those emotional things away from my psyche or my unconscious even. So it made more sense to me to just deal with it head on and try to process it so that I wouldn't carry the weight of that the entire day. So that was, part of, self-care and trying to be a good steward of the time and take advantage of what was happening in the world. I wasn't thinking about a book though. I was just trying to process the information and stay healthier than I might otherwise have been by being consumed with it and just sitting with it and not doing anything with it. I know a lot of friends actually were shut down by the pandemic and they couldn't create anything. I was not one of those people. These last 2 years have been the most prolific 2 years in my life.
So what did you, I always said from the beginning of the pandemic, about 6 months into it, that the pandemic, as horrific as it was, and still is, it's still going on, we're still in it, that it forced a lot of people to sit down and reassess what was important in their life.
True.
And that a lot of people were going to start making a lot of changes because this was such a monumental thing to happen to all of the earth, all of the people living on the earth. Did you go through a period of reassessment about what was important? Are there some things that you would do differently now that you maybe didn't write about when you put this book together?
I think I didn't anticipate it lasting this long. I even tried to predict how it might impact us. And I think I dealt with all of that in the collection. I was surprised that there were enough poems, but it turned out that, I was still writing when the month was over. I wrote a poem a day tied to what was happening in the news, connected to pandemic and protests from April 1st through the middle of July. And from that, we called this collection. The only thing I think I read a poem about my reassessment. It was how I spent my time and who was important and how valuable they were. And then, and I spent more time, worrying about other people. The only thing that surprised me was the amount of people and the degree of commitment to saying it was a hoax. I never understood how you could watch the news and say, that's not real. And it was happening not just in everybody's state and city, but over the whole world. It was a global pandemic. And to look it in the face and stand up in front of television and say, oh, this will be over next week, or it's a hoax, or it's not true, has really been the most stunning thing I witnessed in my time on the planet. And I still don't understand the degree of commitment to that and how many people are committed to it. I think it says a lot about, these modern societies, because it's not just the United States. These kind of attitudes are prevalent in Europe, across Europe, and wherever politics reign, and but I guess the best example of people in power exhibiting what was most important was what happened in those meatpacking plants, and there being an executive decree to make sure meat made it to American dinner tables in the face of who was dying. Black and brown people and people at the margins were expendable, and then there were elected officials saying that it's patriotic to die for the economy. I'm like, where are we? What world, what land, what time is this that you can say that out loud, and it make the news and nobody blink? So that's the thing that if I come closer, miss anything to reassess, I didn't anticipate that, and I don't know that I could have anticipated. I think I didn't. I believe that this kind of horror and death and plague-like data would make people behave differently. But I think I underestimated the power of racism and greed, and power and the need to cling to it.
Interesting. Yeah, I also was watching the news every day when it first started, and the story that resonated the most with me was the one about the young woman. She was in her maybe 20 at the time, and she worked as cashier in one of the grocery stores, and she got COVID and she died. And her mother, they were interviewing her mother on one of the national news commentary shows, and it was just heartbreaking to hear this mother just literally screaming into the camera that that they sent her daughter's last paycheck to her, and the paycheck was for $20.
Just what a slap in the face. But I think it was consistent with so much stuff. There's a poem in here about first responders, and my mother was a nurse, about all the nurses that were protesting because they were getting sick and dying, and nobody seemed to care. There's a poem about a 10-year-old kid on a ventilator in Kentucky, in a place where people were saying it's a hoax. And here's a kid, early in the pandemic, this close to death because people weren't taking it seriously. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. What could you do? I liked your Easter prayer for Easter prayer.
See, you also thought
I saw it parts. It was funny, but you know what it is? The topic is so serious. Yet when you break it down to its minute level and you start looking at it, you realize the absurdity of the situation.
Yes.
And it makes you laugh, even though you don't really think that it's funny, but it makes you laugh because it's just like, that poem kind of reminds me of a really, the way it's written, it reminds me of how comedians put together their acts. They take the most absurd thing that people do, and then they build a whole routine around it. And when you hear the routine, you're like, well, that surely is really hilariously funny. But then you realize they're really putting back at you what is actual really life going on here. This is what people normally do, and we don't think anything of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of humor. I'm currently building a class that's going to focus on Black humor. And I think contemporary fans of comedy who never heard Richard Pryor or Red Fox have no idea, how brand new this thing they listen to and laugh about is not. I think there's, I have a clip of Richard Pryor making a joke about police brutality. That sounds like he's talking about George Floyd, and this thing is almost 50 years old. Red Fox doing the same thing, you know, even earlier. But I think one of the things I appreciate about humor is how some communities depend on humor as a survival tool. That when things are so depressing or hard or angry or difficult, you know, if you can get to the point where you can laugh about this thing, then you've made some progress in your own, you know, self-preservation. And I kind of use that to measure. There's a poem I have in here that kind of measures how we'll know when we've survived COVID, is when we can get to the point where we can laugh about it. And you know, I always remember comedians making jokes, and there's a kind of a refrain that they use that says, it goes too soon, where they might make a joke and the audience is so flat and horrified that they just joked about it, that clearly it's too soon to make the joke about that thing, whatever it is in the news.
Mhm.
And you can almost measure if it's too soon by how a group responds to it. You know, I remember when it was too soon to make Michael Jackson jokes, you know, for a long time. And then we passed that point, and now you hear them, and only a few people groan. You know, those are diehard Michael Jackson fans, and they're gonna always groan. But a lot of people will see the humor in it, and that's it. But I think that's without humor, I don't know how we would survive. You know, I think we just give up. But I think it's a good barometer of how we're doing psychologically in the midst of so much trauma, about how easy it is to laugh about a thing, and the need to have the laughter in the first place.
Mm. Interesting. Anybody else out there have any questions? Speak up. Take yourself off mute.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Naomi.
Hi.
I live in the Bronx. Totally enjoyed the reading. I look forward to the book. I was wondering a little bit about your editing process, because you were saying that you would, you know, write a poem a day. So processing what went on that day. So then when it's like 4 months later or whatever, and you're editing it and something else has gone on that day, I'm just wondering how the ongoing nature of the pandemic affected your editing of your own poems, if at all.
Well, I think when I think about the amount of time the pandemic provided to actually work on poetry, added to the fact that most of that period where the poems have been written was summer, and I'm a teacher, so I have the entire summer off. I had time to edit everything I wrote, but one of the things that I committed to was, because I start my writing process before I get out of bed, I'm at least thinking about what I'm going to work on, because I thought about it before I went to sleep, and my subconscious had been chewing on it all night. So I've got stuff to do as soon as my eyes open, and before even. And that starts about 4:30 every morning. And it comes with I don't sleep a lot. I can't sleep a lot. So it's easy to wake up at 4:30 and go to work. It's something I learned to do in high school, because, you know, I mentioned in the beginning, I'm one of 11, which meant that there was almost no quiet time in my house growing up, but it did exist. If you could wake up before everybody else, there was real quiet time. So I still do that, and I try to use that. But for me, I needed to create some pressure for me. So what I also did, sometime in the morning, I posted an early draft on Facebook. So I had that thing hanging over my head. And then once it was posted, I didn't look at it again. You know, I moved on to the next thing. And of course, I wasn't trying to write a book, so I wasn't even thinking about editing them yet. It wasn't until the middle of the summer, when my publisher reached out to me and said, you know, we got a book here, that I started pulling them together as a collection, and then spending time every day trying to find an order and to polish them up. But I work really hard between 4:30 in the morning till about 9 o'clock. That's almost 4 hours to work on an individual poem. And these aren't, Nikki Finney 10-page poems. Many of these are, 12 lines, sonnet length. There's a lot there, but I tried to only put as much food on my plate as I could eat every day when it comes to the poem I was working on. And then get used to letting it go and clearing my plate and getting ready for the next thing. And it just worked out that way. I didn't know the thing wouldn't be over in months or by the end of the summer or next week, as somebody would say. So I try to stay really, really focused because I thought it wouldn't last. And when I stopped, months after I stopped, I regretted that I didn't keep going. Although I'd be exhausted by now, but I still think about, starting another one, but I'd hate to give the pandemic that much power to keep going. I want to at least trick myself into believing it'll be over soon, even though in reality, it'll be something that, we have to learn to live with, it seems. And I think most pandemics have like a 6-year cycle anyway, but people don't like to talk about that.
Oh.
Thanks.
Sorry.
I didn't know that, but I have gotten to the point where it's like, okay, people, stop wishing it to go away. Just figure out how you're gonna live with it. That's it. I'm at that point now. So it's kind of like, I go to my doctor's offices for my doctor's visits. I say to my doctors, people need to just figure out how they're gonna live with it and keep going. Yeah. It's not going away. Reality check. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. If you study pandemics, that's the reality. That's our reality. There's a 6-year cycle. And I think that's, the logic behind, there are not many things that we can afford to just put on hold for 6 years. Not your job, not your education, not, and if, I think if conservatives had led with that, instead of like, it's time to get back to the economy. We got to keep America growing and moving. It would have sounded more humane and been more logical. But I think that's the thing. It's like, some of these choices just seem so inhumane to me over the last 2 years. And, I'm also in academia. I heard somebody saying they were waiting to see what the powers that be on campus were going to say about whether or not they're teaching in person or virtually. Our powers that be declared months ago that whatever, regardless of what happened, we were going back to in-person teaching and learning because that's what the students wanted and that's what their parents wanted. And in truth, we know the influence and power of capitalism. We also have 19 new dorms on campus and we got to pay the mortgage on those, whether anybody's in them or not. So somebody did the math and figured out, how many people could afford to die before it was a risk at not making that money. I really believe that. I think it was just a mathematical business decision. And somebody said, we got enough insurance, we can cover it, make that money. I think that's, and it's this is a capitalist society. So it's not a surprise. I just wish they would quit pretending that they're making humane decisions in the best interests of somebody else other than the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Abby, you have a question?
Well, it's more of a comment. I was very glad that you didn't shut down. You said that, it's like many of us, became isolated emotionally. And being a poet, you did your job exceptionally well because you touched on the very themes and human themes that we all were going through, and yet we aren't able, like you, to express them as well. And the essence of what we've been going through. I was greatly moved by the essential workers, having worked with for several years in an organization that with people applying for asylum with immigrants, and the very fact of who these people are, who are going to those meatpacking places and those every single day in those conditions with no protections. And I think all the themes throughout the book, that all your poems today were so connected to us all. I mean, what we all were, I mean, I'm expressing for myself, but I know a lot of other people feel similarly, how it was spot on, you know, in terms of what you were expressing and what we all are feeling, you know. And I was a teacher of young children for many years, and I just want to point out one of my favorite books that I read to kids, and that they loved, was a book called Frederick, and it was about by Leo Leone, and it was about a colony of mice who were preparing for winter, and everybody was working very physically hard and doing this thing and gathering the seeds and the things that they needed to, you know, have go through winter through. And they see this one mouse to the side who's not doing anything, you know, and they're very, you know, they're very angry at him at first, you know. They're saying, why, you know, he just seems to be daydreaming, or he seems to be doing nothing, you know, while we're working, you know. And then as they turn to him, you know, and they've gathered and done all their work, they turn to him and they say, well, Frederick, what have you done? And he said, and he gives back to them a poem of what they've been through, all the things that they actually did and experienced. And they say at the end, Frederick, you are a poet. And he says, yes, I know it. And the kids loved this book, and I loved this book. And it was just like, it's you know, it touched on the things that a poet's job is, that, you know, that it helps restore our humanity. So thank you. Thank you. And I look forward to reading your book. And
tell me the title of that book again. And
it's called Frederick, and it's by Leo Leone, who is a very wonderful children's book writer and illustrator. And it's just a precious book. You know, he's written several other books too that are great for kids. Swimming, which is about a fish that also shows the other fishes how to come together in unity to fight the bigger fish who are trying to just devour them. You know, that's another great book by him, Swimming.
Thank you for that.
I know you have a kid. You have a kid, right?
Yes, we have a kid here. He loves books. So. And those are the kind we want in his hands too.
Oh, anybody else have any questions? Well, I want to make one comment about your poem, of the persona poem you did for Chauvin's Knee. I really like that. I really like that because it's a different way into the event that happened, and it added a different, an additional layer of complexity to that situation.
Well, thank you for that. I was looking for some distance between the reader and the subject to allow the poem to happen, because of all the things, when I wrote it, the event was so present, and it was such a horrendous, this public lynching, that I didn't want to repeat the horror of it but
Mhm.
I felt the need to not leave it out, to find a way to talk about it. And what I've learned, you know, having written 5 collections of persona poems, is that distance, by putting in another voice, does something for the reader and the listener, that allows them to be as close as possible to it, but not be so close that it harms them, because it kind of removes it just enough to have the conversation without, you know, removing any of the trauma or lessening the importance of the event, but it just kind of makes it more palatable. The same thing they do when they make medicine taste better for kids. I think sometimes we do that as writers, and for ourselves, because, you know, when I wrote the book about Medgar Evers, I mean, you already know how the book is going to end, you know, right? And there's so much trauma, you know, for the family, and around the event of his death or his assassination, that how do you stretch that for a whole collection and deal with that? That was one of the things that made it possible for me, is to use dreams, have the characters dream, and to write in persona. In that collection, I wrote a poem in the persona of the bullet that traveled through Medgar's body and into the house and ricocheted around and landed in the kitchen. And it's one of my favorite poems to read. Even though it's, you know, you can get closer to his death than the bullet, but it becomes this thing that people, you know, kind of held on to, because I think it surprises them. It's something they don't think about, because they think about the pure horror of it. But then if you can somehow remove yourself from that traditional position of listening to this other space where you focus on the bullet itself and listen to the bullet speak, which is kind of absurd because bullets don't speak. But if they spoke, what would they say? That all those questions in your head give you enough distance to kind of breathe that in and experience it in a way that that feels like art happening to you, and not trauma being revisited. And I think that's the goal of some of my persona poems, especially when the subject is so difficult.
Mm. Yes, I noticed that in your work, you are an excellent chronicler of history, both present, past history. The way you chronicle it in your writings,
Thank you.
it's easy to digest in the mind. It's not something that's going to make you say, "Oh, I can't read this," and put it down. You know, that kind of thing. You know, some writers write stuff that's so heavy you can only take it in small doses.
Yeah.
Really small doses. Because it just becomes, reading something that heavy becomes almost a trauma to the psyche.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's something we don't talk about enough as writers and poets. You know, I remember, to me, it wasn't something that I studied anywhere, but I remember what made it important to me was having a stack of the rough drafts of all the poems that end up going in the Medgar book. They were in no particular order. I was at a reading in Virginia at Radford University and had an audience of librarians, you know, in a library, about 50 of us. And I just, for whatever reason, I just chose to read all the poems in the voice of the assassin. And I read straight for about 30 minutes in his voice. And then, you know, I never looked up because I didn't know the poems well enough to just kind of look up and check them in the audience. I just read them. And then I stopped at the end and looked up, and everybody was in tears. I mean, there were people like who had to walk out of the room because it was such a traumatic experience to, even though they knew the details of the event, that it, you know, it brought up their own personal traumas, is what some of the things people said. But what I learned from that moment was that I didn't want to do that in the book because people wouldn't finish it. So when I paced the poems, I was really thinking about the emotional trajectory and this roller coaster ride I wanted people to experience. I wanted them to have humor and pathos and, you know, fear and everything the human heart can hold, but not all at once. You know, I wanted to put the poems in an order that allowed you to move through it in a survivable way without, you know, dimming the truth in it, but also not traumatizing you as a reader. I think that's a real challenge when we take on historical events that, or, you know, occurrences that have that kind of weight, emotional weight in them, is to think about what is it you're doing to the reader, or you're inviting them to experience. You know, we kind of have an obligation, I think, and it's kind of selfish too, if you want the reader to finish the book. If I hadn't made those choices, I think a lot of people would have just put it down halfway through and said, this is too much. Because that's what that room said to me that night, that, you know, that it hurt too much. Stop, please. And, you know, there's nothing funny about this man's death. You know, there's nothing funny about the trauma his family experienced. There's nothing funny about that era in our history. But so what can you do as a writer to make it able for people to move through it and learn from it and appreciate it as art without diluting any of the truth in it? I think that's not an easy thing.
No, that's true. It's not. It really isn't. Well, one question I have to ask you, is that book available for sale?
All of these books are available for sale, of course. Masterman Black.
Is that one out on, it's out, where can we get it? The pandemic book.
I believe, you know, you can, by now there's even a downloadable version, but Accents Publishing, I think you can just Google Accents. I know you can get it directly from the publisher, but I think it's also available. You know, I don't want to say the other place because, you know, it just, I love independent booksellers, but there's a place you can get it on your doorstep tomorrow.
Okay, got it.
Go to your independent small bookstore who's trying to stay open and have them order it for you. Instead of trying to save $6, you know. But Masterman Black, Pandemic and Protest Poems is the name of the book. And it's Accents Publishing, ACCENTS. And you can order directly from their website as well. And it came out last year, so.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure I'm gonna be getting my copy.
Well, actually,
to add to my library.
That's my COVID thing. It came out 2 years ago. I realize now that COVID has gone on so long. It just came out in 2020, in the fall of 2020. But I've been reading from it for 2 years. Is it 22 already? 2022?
Yes.
I just put a link in the chat.
Oh,
directly
great.
to the book. Yeah.
Thank you.
At Accents, not at that other place.
Yes. You're with me. You're with me here.
Well, Frank, I want to, oh wait, somebody has a question? Jump right in. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much for your poetry. Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
I've never spoken with a poet laureate before. So I wonder, what was it like for what was your experience like being the poet laureate of Kentucky?
You know, if I had to summarize it, I would say it was beautiful for me from the very beginning. And mostly because of my commitment to community, my hometown of Danville, Kentucky, small town, you know, group 25,000 people. But you drive into Danville from 5 different directions, and there's a sign, a huge sign that says, hometown of Frank X. Walker, Poet Laureate of Kentucky, 14. And and it's still up. I mean, my exes and people who hated me haven't found a way to tear down those signs. So that says a lot. But more than that, at my installation at the state capitol, my hometown sent 2 school buses filled with people to be there when it was announced. And I was installed and I read for 5 minutes, but there was this thunderous roar because there was only seating for like 25 people, but there were 200 people there from my hometown. And it was overwhelming. And that kind of love and appreciation for the arts and for writing in particular was something that surprised me because I knew how committed we were to football. And it's a title town and we win state championships and that's what makes the news. But, my hometown, my small hometown, dedicated the sign, they showed up at the installation. And today, I think we're at the 8th annual Frank X. Walker Literary Festival, 8th or 9th. I think this year was the 8th, where all the schools, the county and the city schools at every grade level, they do something connected to poetry that one day early in the fall. And I go back home and read and share and bring my friends. And it's amazing. I'm so proud. So when I say it felt beautiful, it's because I'm thinking about the entire thing and how people responded. And also what it says about, the reputation, how it pushes against the reputation of this state of Kentucky. A lot of people, let's say on the West Coast, might believe that there are no Black people in Kentucky. But, we currently have our second ever African-American poet laureate. Crystal Wilkinson is a current laureate. So that's 2 Black people in the state. That's a red state. So whatever you think about it, add that to it, because it also says something about how we appreciate literature, and who's writing it, and how much it means at the highest levels, because the governor is involved in this appointment and selection. So it's been beautiful to be this Commonwealth's poet laureate and to still enjoy the dividends of something that officially has been over for 7 years. 8. 7.
Thank you. I have one more question for you.
Sure.
You say you came up in hip hop.
I'm a child of hip hop, yes.
Child of hip hop. Okay. So how does that affect your poetry? And I guess added in that is, when did you know you wanted to be a poet? At what age?
I still don't want to be a poet. I don't know that I ever did. I would say that poetry is a language. If you can be multilingual or multi-genre, poetry is just a language that I speak. That's more accessible to people. I'm trained as a fiction writer. I'm just really slow at writing fiction. I finally finished a novel, but it's taken me 10 years. But it's because of how I work and what it takes time-wise to produce something that's that long versus something that's 12 lines. I'm a poet because that's all the time I have. The people know me for my poetry because I tend to write a lot. Have the intro said 8, but actually there are 10 books that are in print. The first one that came out in 2000 is still in circulation. It's in its, I think, 15th printing. But it has more to do with, I think, the work being accessible to people versus people being surprised that Black men write poetry. But I think it's people are still discovering that there are people of color in Appalachia. So it's like having a secret planet that people go, wow, Appalachia is a thing, is a place. And then it's like a new planet was discovered for people. But as far as hip hop and learning from it, how it it helped. I would say music in general was part of my education. My first politics came through like Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder lyrics. I count them as influences. When people ask you, who are you reading or what poets or writers influenced you? I include musicians, especially those two, and Curtis Mayfield. Those are three kind of really influential artists for me because, they were also activists and committed to this activism that was about social change. And I feel like I'm in that vein. And if you can not surrender your politics and also create art, it kind of puts you in a small group of people. And I'm honored to be in that, in that kind of niche group, because I think, that's what art should do. I think I'm not an artist for art's sake. I'm not trying to make something beautiful. I'm just trying to tell the truth. And if that truth can impact social change or lift up social justice issues, that's like 2 for 1. That's like a bonus check with your regular check. If that makes sense at all. But yeah, hip hop and other music taught me the importance of having a political opinion and expressing it, and also to respect the beauty of the spoken word. I think the last poets probably did it better because they had music and poetry, and it was political. I count them as among my musical influences. But this is an oral tradition. It works best. As much as I love books, it works best when you hear it, when somebody reads it and it adds something to it. It's like going to the movies and having them cut the sound off and you feel like you miss something. But the poetry reading with a real poet reading his own or her own work, it's like, having the lights and the sound and the action all working, together. I hope that was the last question. I have nothing left.
Well, Frank, for someone who was not trying to be a poet, I think you found your family. You found your tribe.
It's a beautiful tribe. I'm glad you're in it.
That it is. It is a beautiful tribe. Well, everyone, I'm going to turn it back over to Joy to close us out. And I want to thank Frank for reading for us today and discussing during the Q&A with us and giving us his opinions and processes and different things that we've talked about. And I hope that all of you, including Frank, will come back next month when we are going to have the great Willie Perdomo as our feature.
Set the nail to the head.
So I hope that you will come back with us next month and and enjoy Willie and his work. And I'm turning it back over to Joy. And thank you again so much, Frank, for reading for us today. Really, really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was fantastic. And I saw that a few of you donated, and we're very grateful about that. And Frank, we're very, very grateful to you. And you just brought home so much about what's going on now. And I wrote down that quote, "I'm not trying to make something beautiful. I'm just trying to tell the truth." And that certainly came through. You certainly told the truth today. So thank you, everybody. And we hope to see you again soon. For more information, go to onebreathrising.org, and we will continue to bring you the truth. So have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Thank you again. Very grateful.
Your comments, yes, Gil Scott Heron.
I'll send you the chat, Frank.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Frank.